Hi, I'm Jody McInerney, and in this video I'm going to discuss how a procedural simulation can be used to replace in-person lab activity for high school biology students. Often when students are studying photosynthesis and respiration, they can come in with misconceptions about how plants do respiration and the cycling of the materials between plants and animals. And so doing this experiment actually can help them visually observe when carbon dioxide is being produced by an organism through the use of an indicator, bromothymol blue. And the indicator turns yellower when there's more carbon dioxide, and it stays bluer when there is less carbon dioxide present. And so what that allows them to do is observe when respiration is taking place with the production of carbon dioxide and the balance that happens when you've got more than one organism doing respiration and photosynthesis. The problem with doing this as a hands-on activity is that you use a lot of organisms. You have to have a set for each group of students doing the experiment, and a lot of them end up dying in the process, and that's a problem for some students who don't want to kill organisms during experiments, and it also increases the cost and may not be entirely necessary for students to still understand and gain what teachers want them to learn from the experiment. So let's have a look at how this simulation works to give them the same experience. This is a branching scenario, so what that means is that students are asked questions and they get to choose which organism they're going to experiment with, and then what condition they're going to use, and then based on that they are provided with the results of the experiment and they have to analyze those results. This interactivity and choice makes the simulation more like a game, and that and some other features of the simulation can be more motivating and engaging for students. To help students work through the simulation, they are provided with a worksheet that they can fill out as they're doing their experiments. And then once they get into the simulation, they actually get to choose an avatar for themselves, and they interact with a teacher character who helps guide them through the simulation and also makes it more interactive and interesting, more like a dialogue. So let's look at how this simulation works. So it starts out with a little bit of some information, a review of what the students have studied so far to connect them to their prior knowledge, and a couple of questions about that as Dr. Carvin discusses the organisms that are in the experiment. So there's a little bit of a discussion about the ecology of gulf shrimp, and then they're asked to identify whether they're producers, consumers, or decomposers. And anytime a student is asked a question and they choose an answer, then they get feedback on what their answer is. So for example, if I just chose the wrong answer, it would just tell them simply that that's not what it is and what the correct answer would be. So the question and answers work in a variety of ways, but as they're working through, they fill out the information in this worksheet, and this continues until they get to the experiment section. So again, information about elodea and what their role is in the ecosystem. And then they continue on to where they start to make choices about what to do in the experiment. So they get introduced to what the role of bromothymol blue dye is in the experiment, and then they make their choice of an organism. So they could choose to do elodea first, or they could do ghost shrimp, or they could do both. So let's say they want to do both. Okay, then they would write that down on their guided worksheet, the organism they chose, and they would make a prediction about what they think is going to happen in the experiment after they choose whether they're going to do the experiment in the light or in the dark. So let's say they do it in the light. Okay, so then they would write down the prediction on their worksheet of what they think the color change is going to be and why they think that is. So that's sort of to demonstrate what their current understanding is of respiration, photosynthesis, and what's going to happen. So they might predict that with ghost shrimp and elodea in there, well, maybe there'll be more carbon dioxide. Maybe it's going to turn really green, or even more, it'll turn yellow. Once they've made their selection, they can proceed to see the results of the experiment. And then they can draw conclusions from what the experimental results show. So this is where it can come in handy to have this help section, because one of the things that is provided in the little help section is an image of what these test tubes look like beforehand. So they can look and see, oh wait, everything beforehand was this sort of turquoise blue color. So let's see at the end, well gosh, the color change didn't really happen. So what does that mean? So then they can choose from these answers to these questions to explain what they're observing, and then they can write that into their guided worksheet. So in addition to the feedback that a player gets on their answers to questions in the sim, they also get feedback about their score on one or more objectives. So in that case, both objectives, the answer was correct, and they earned points towards the objectives. And then they also will be told they're correct on the responses to the questions. And let's say, for example, they click the wrong answer. Then they're going to show that they didn't get the points on that objective, and that they were partially correct, but why their answer was not fully correct. And it tells them what the correct answer should have been. So at the end of each experiment, then they have to go back and look at, well, what was my prediction and was I correct? And then reflect on what they wrote and what the outcome of the experiment would be. And then if they're finished with that branch of the simulation, they're going to get a score. So in this case, they didn't do well enough on their knowledge of the application of knowledge for the roles of plants and animals in ecosystems and in photosynthesis and respiration. They need to review more information, but they did an excellent job with their lab observations. So what they would need to do in order to finish up the other branches of the experiment, because there's actually 2 more experiments they'll have to do, is they can actually go ahead and open this link back up, start the simulation again, and make some different choices. So this is just one example of how simulations could be used with high school biology students. You could also consider using them for experiments that might be too dangerous for the classroom, like looking at radioactive decay, or in having them examine things that are cellular processes that are too small to really see in the real world. So hopefully this encourages you to seek out some other types of simulations and to use them. Thank you.